Hello and welcome to the STEM and Research Podcast. Today we have Maanasi Nair with us.
Maanasi is interested in biological sciences research. For her work in cancer drug resistance, she was honored with a special award at the IRIS National Fair this year. She was also a Grand Award winner and thereby an ISEF finalist. Apart from her research, she is interested in swimming, Bharatanatyam, theatre, and vocal music. Hi Maanasi, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's get started with the interview. So how did you get into research? Was it gradual or was there a defining moment that got you into it?
It was definitely a gradual process. I never really saw it coming because it actually started in a summer during my middle school years where the intent was only to keep me busy for the summer, and me and a couple of my friends just approached this lab, and the director there offered just to give us like a tour of the lab. But because that sparked my interest in the sciences and actually the practical sciences, I kept going back every summer, and then she finally allowed me to start working on things in the lab, and then finally a project by myself, which led me into the world of research, and it was definitely a great choice for me.
Cool. What field do you hope to enter in the future? So your academic field.
Definitely medicine. Definitely medicine. I am looking for becoming a doctor in the future, so I am going in that direction.
So, how has your school influenced you, influenced your research endeavors in general? Has your academic curriculum helped you out in any way?
For sure, because if you want to talk about research, specifically the last 4 years of high school have helped me a lot, because for every subject that you take, it's not simply learning the material that's in the textbook. They really encourage you to go beyond and explore your interests. And in the last 2 years, the syllabus actually has a mandatory part of the curriculum where you do complete an experiment in your school to a certain standard quality. So that kind of values, those kind of investigation interest has always been instilled in me through my academic curriculum. So that definitely did help me understand what needed to be done before the actual practical research in the lab, because the common misconception is that research is just sitting in a lab and moving around a bunch of like plates or pipettes, but that's not how it is, right? You have to read a lot before, you have to analyze, you have to understand the background. So all that kind of searching before the actual experimentation was definitely supported by my academic curriculum.
So, your academic curriculum being the IB board, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So maybe we can now talk a bit about your drug resistance research in cancer. So how did you get into cancer research in the first place?
So, as I said, the lab that I went to in my middle school years, they are actually partnered with a cancer hospital. And so part of their job is to look at the work for that hospital. So they are interested in cancer and stem cell research. So because I was exposed to that environment first, that is what I got into, cancer research. And honestly, because when you go there, you realize that even though cancer, if you haven't experienced it firsthand or through your family members, it seems like this big thing that's impersonalized and you don't know about. But when you are there in a lab, you realize how close it can be to you and to everyone. And so the importance of that really dawned on me, and I was definitely attracted to seeing whether I could work there.
Mm-hmm. Could you explain your research for our viewers?
Yes, so this project was looking at reversing chemo drug resistance in cancer cells using an herbal formulation. So essentially what happens when a person comes in with cancer is that the main form of treatment is chemotherapy, where you administer certain types of drugs. And to an extent it is successful, but there are a lot of cases where the cancer relapses or it comes back. And so the patients have to come back for their second round or third round of treatment. What makes this extremely dangerous is the fact that the relapse cancer, the cancer that came back, is no longer susceptible to the drugs that were used before, and that's when we call it drug resistant. And so in order to kill the cancer cells, the doctors would be resorted to using lethal doses of the drug, which basically is not possible. And so my research tried to look at using herbal formulations, specifically out of green tea and turmeric, in reversing this drug resistance in cancer cells. So that if a patient comes back with relapsed cancer, theoretically, this formulation could be used alongside the original drug that was used to treat the cancer in order to give them that second treatment and that another chance at life. So it's really important because some people think when you come back with resistant cancer, that's the end of the journey. Like, there's not much you can do after that. But if this is successful in the future, it would be great to implement it in the medical field.
How do you see it being implemented in the future? Like, how long in the future do you think?
For sure, it's going to take a while because my experiment was one of the preliminary trials in vitro, which means not in the body. It's in a cell plate or cell culture. So for that to undergo more trials to understand about everything, how it works, then to undergo like the human trials, the clinical trials, that will take a bunch of years. So, but it's definitely a start. There always has to be a start to something.
So you've also worked in neurovision in the past, specifically search asymmetry. Could you explain to the viewers what exactly is search asymmetry?
Okay, so this is one of my recent projects. So search asymmetry is a phenomenon that happens when you look at something called a search paradigm. So in the most rudimentary sense, a search is when you look for a target among a bunch of distractors, right? So a search paradigm is when in the first search that you do, you're looking for target A among a bunch of distractor Bs. And the second search you do is searching for target B among a set of distractors A. So it's a reversal, it's a switch. Now, intuitively, the time it takes to find target A should be the same it takes to find target B. But search asymmetry arises when there's a discrepancy between those search times. And why it's really significant in the field of vision is because it's a great way to understand how your brain processes vision. There's a lot still unknown about that, even today, because it's what we call, because your eye takes in an input that has less dimensions than the image produced by your brain. So it's a very complex phenomenon, and one way to look at how the brain processes vision is through search paradigms and search asymmetry.
So what exactly did you research on this topic?
Because it's a relatively unresearched topic, there have been theories that have put out to define what creates a search asymmetry. And the main point in those theories being that there are a certain list of features that if a target has a presence of those features, it will take less search time than its inverse search. So I basically put that theory to test by including a common feature between the target and the distractor. So I'll give you an example which will be easier to visualize. Let's say I have a curve and straight lines. So my first search would be finding a curve among straight lines. My second search would be finding a line among curves. So what I do for my experiment would be putting a circle around all of them, all the straight lines and all the circles, all the curves, and see what happens to the search asymmetry at that point of time. Interestingly enough, the search asymmetry was not observed once the common feature was there. And so that puts a limit to the theory that is out in the scientific community right now. Because if it is a presence of a feature, my common feature does not detract from the effect of that. So there is something that needs to be looked into after this.
Yep, I would say that's the point of research, isn't it? So, do you think you faced any significant drawbacks or challenges while you were doing this research? What have you found, except for the fact that if you have a common feature, then it sort of goes against what there's a current scientific consensus on.
So what challenges did I face during my research?
Yeah.
So for this particular one, the main challenge was the pandemic that affected the way I could get my data. Particularly in this case, it had to do with people, right? You had to get participants to search. So conducting the experiment itself was pretty difficult because I had to make sure that I was carrying my laptop in a sanitized way. People were willing. So my experiment did get reduced to a very, very small population size. And that does put some limitation on your results and data. So in cases like this, there's nothing but you can do but wait it out or figure out ways to put it in a non-contact manner to get data. But that's just something I faced in this particular one. In general research, if you're talking about obstacles, there's a lot that will come your way, and I'm sure both of you are aware of that. You expect certain results, nothing works. You expect something else, and then you get a different result. And it's really confusing in the beginning and in the middle, but what matters is that perseverance that you have until you continue to do it more and more, and then you are satisfied with what you have.
So do you hope to, maybe like once the pandemic is over, do you hope to continue this research in any form?
Definitely. So my primary priority would be to get more people and more data for this particular one that I did, and then expand. I only used one search paradigm, the one that I explained, and expand that to a bunch of different ones just to see if the results will hold across everything.
Yep, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about the summer program that you attended at University of California, Santa Barbara? So maybe you could just introduce the program itself.
Okay, so the program I attended is called the Research Mentorship Program, or RMP, at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So it's a 6-week residential program that you have to apply for, and then you get selected, and then you are offered stay and for those 6 weeks, and you get to work. The most important part is that you get to work with university staff, almost one-on-one. Like, they are your mentor for those 6 weeks of the research. So it's a brilliant opportunity because you get a taste of what university level research is like, the content as well as the standards and the protocols and the quality that they expect there, right? Because you are in that environment. Apart from just the research, they train you really well on scientific communication, presentation to different audiences, and that's a really, really important part when you are getting into STEM, because if you do research and it's only that you can understand it, there's no point because you have to propagate the information. So it was a really, really helpful program. It's amazing. Like, I would recommend it to anyone.
So now that we're on the topic, so maybe we could talk about how was your experience there? Was there like a favorite or the most memorable moment from that experience? It may or may not be academic though.
Yeah, it's a good point you brought that up because I have one that's academic related and one that's not. So I'll start with the STEM one. So I worked with neurons in that project. I was looking at Williams syndrome neurons, and I was trying to identify whether there was an overexpression of a certain gene that would probably hint at why these neurons are diseased. So one part of that research was to grow the neurons first off, which is a difficult process. It's really sensitive. And then imaging that under a fluorescent microscope. So basically the neurons will look green against a black background. So not only did culturing those neurons take forever, but it was just a really tedious process of getting it in the microscope and trying to find the neurons. And it was just a really long day. Nothing was working, everybody was tired. It was like July 4th the next day, so everybody just wanted to go home. And I was really sad because I wasn't getting much images. But I remember sitting in that dark room and then seeing that the green line on the monitor, and like the happiness you get from that is unbelievable. And I was like, hallelujah, I'm finally getting something. My other memorable memory was definitely with the people I met there, because what's so amazing about these programs is that you get to meet people who are so invested into their own subjects. It's not just limited to STEM. Their own subjects from across the world. So you go there and you're part of an international community that just shares that love for learning. And you bond so well, even if it's just 6 weeks. I've made some of my best friends there. And UCSB is bordering a beach. And I love beaches. And so during one of our free times, my friends and I, we just went to the side of the beach and just sat there, just relaxing after a long day of research. And it was really worth it. Like, it's rewarding, you know?
It's true. It's really the people who make the difference. So I personally think that summer programs are a great way to network with your peers and professionals in an international setting. What's your take on this? So has there been an incident where you felt it helped with you, like your progression?
Definitely. In the case of my the director of the program, I'm still in touch with her. My professor that I worked with, I'm still in touch with her. They are busy, so they take some time to respond, but just being able to have that point of contact is really helpful. Most of all, I would say, is the kids that you meet, because they come from across the world, and because I talk to them on a daily basis. And if I have any questions regarding STEM, regarding academics, regarding college, regarding my personal life, anything you want, once you make those friendships in that sort of program, they stay for a lifetime. So it's really helpful getting to know people from across the world, and you can always call on them if you have a project idea and you want to pitch it to someone in California. You can connect from India to California, and it's beautiful.
So how would you say that this academic program fit into your STEM journey? So in the bigger picture.
The main thing, I think, is that it gave me a wider perspective on the different fields that I can research in. Being in India, there are so many opportunities, but I personally was dedicated to this one lab in cancer and stem cell research. So that was all I was exposed to. You realize that STEM is it's an area of so many integrated fields, right? So you're not limited to just one specialty that you have touched upon for a couple of years in your life, especially when you're still a student. And so going to RMP really helped me expand my horizons that way, getting into neuroscience research.
Could you maybe briefly talk about the project or the research work that you did there? I think you already mentioned it. Maybe you could just go into it a bit deeper.
Sure. So I worked with neurons that are diseased with the Williams syndrome, which is basically a genetic disorder, and it causes the neurons to function improperly in the body. So again, this was an in vitro study where I cultured these Williams syndrome neurons and essentially wanted to figure out the reason behind why they ended up becoming diseased. And so you do these. The hypothesis was that this particular gene would be overexpressed. And so you run a bunch of genetic protocols in order to measure the amount of the gene that is being expressed in your neurons, and then you kind of compare it to genes you know are normal and see whether it has been overexpressed or not. And why it's important is because it can give you an insight into why the morphology is different or why it works different, because the gene that I was looking at is specifically coding for a splicing factor, which means that it makes different proteins as compared to what the genome has. So if that has been overexpressed, there'll be multiple proteins that have been expressed at different levels and changing the morphology. So it was just providing an insight into why the disease existed.
So it sounds like it was a pretty transformative experience.
For sure.
But how would you say people who perhaps do not have access to international research summer programs for whatsoever reason, is there anything they can do to conduct research at home, sitting where they are without going abroad?
100%. The first thing that comes to my mind is definitely make use of the internet. That's something that we've grown up with, and it has a lot of resources. Particularly, one thing I did was with the Pioneer Research Program. So that's completely online. You apply online, they contact you online, and the entire research is done through a platform that they have online. And they connect you with professors from amazing schools in the United States. And so you do your research. It's designed in such a way that the research can be done with you and your laptop only. You can take it further if you have the resources, but at the minimum, you can still do great research, and you have a great mentor as well. So that, especially in times like these, with the pandemic, you can't go out, is really, really helpful. On top of that, most people think that research can only be done in fancy labs. A lot of things can be done at home. a lot of things, if you look at it, if you just look at the right way of doing it, the right experiment, there's a lot of things you can just plants or like small animal research. I mean, in ISEF, if you attended the virtual webinars, people were talking about that too. So there are a lot of things that you can design at home itself.
So that's the Pioneer Research Program.
Yes.
So like you mentioned ISF, could you perhaps comment on participating in science fairs in India, and like maybe just talk about your experience with IRIS?
Yeah, I highly, highly recommend everybody goes to a science fair because it's amazing seeing the kind of work that people are doing from across the nation, and you honestly get inspired because you come into the fair thinking that, okay, I've done this much, that's great. Thinking that perhaps like I might win something, I might not. But that's not the purpose of the entire fair. Like you realize when you get there. When you get there, you see so many stalls, you see so many subjects, and it's just crazy. Like so many kids are invested in this and they're doing whatever they can. And so you meet new friends, you create new connections, you learn more, you understand how the entire community of our age is taking science forward. So it was definitely an eye-opening experience for me. It was great.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you're there before the results, you sort of forget about winning and you're just having so much fun. You only feel the pressure when they're announcing the results.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's also a great way to get to know people like from your region because it's like solely from India, especially for the national fair. So that has been nice. Have your abilities ever been questioned solely based on your age by someone? And if so, how have you responded to it?
All the time, especially when you are in a field like biology, where a lot of it has to do with interacting with the public once you implement your research. A lot of people think that like you're not serious enough or you don't know what it means or like it's not worth their time. I find the best way to combat that is to show them the facts. Like I've done this, and I've done this. So there's nothing stopping you from giving me this opportunity. There are some boundaries that you have to be aware of, like you might not be allowed in this place because you're below the age of 18, so you cannot interact with people, which is the law and the rules. You have to understand that. But as long as you're moving forward and you have solid things to say under your name, nothing can really stop you.
So, I mean, for someone who wants to get into like biological research, but they're struggling with the scientific parts of it and understanding the concepts, perhaps, would you say biology is a very linear subject in which you're supposed to do like the foundational stuff first and then get into some of the more advanced stuff? Or do you think you can just pick a problem and like get acquainted with the technical jargon within that subfield and still be able to contribute sufficiently?
I don't think so. I do think you have to have your basics set right, especially because it's a combination of all the sciences. You have your chemistry, you have a bunch of your physics also in your biology. So you have to know what goes on before you attack what you see, if that makes sense. Like, let's say somebody just wants to jump into cancer research. They have to understand why it's cancer. Why do the cells behave that way? Why are they cells? And you have to understand every single small detail about it before you pick one thing to research on. Otherwise, you don't have that context and you can't really explain your results, even if you get something.
Right. So changing the topic a little bit, at science fairs, we do see a lot of people from Bangalore involved in research. Do you think Bangalore as a city has had any influence on your trajectory?
That's an interesting question. Definitely being one of the bigger cities, one of the metropolitan cities, has its benefits of getting greater opportunities that are closer to you. So that's definitely an advantage because you have that access to people and to places within your city. So that definitely helped. Having said that, I haven't lived anywhere else, so I can't. I've lived in America, but I haven't lived in any other Indian city, so. Growing up in California, I mean, I spent my first 9 years there, so I can't say anything regarding how it affected my ambitions, but I do know that I knew that I wanted to get into my medical profession from a very young age there as well. And that is irrespective of whether it was California or India, because it's about the people. It's about the doctors that I interacted with. My pediatrician in US was brilliant. My doctor here right now, I'm extremely close to her. So it's the people who you interact with who kind of influence you in the way you think and what you want to get into.
So, changing the topic slightly again, you're sort of involved in quite a lot of non-STEM hobbies, if I might call it that, swimming and theater and vocal music and whatnot. Could you talk about your level of involvement with that, first of all?
So, I've always loved doing a lot of things at once. So that was always part of me since a very young age. In terms of like my sports, I have focused on swimming. I've attempted to take it to state level, though it hasn't been that successful. And I'm really invested in the arts as well, because it's just somewhere where you can explore a different part of you, and that I think that's really necessary. So keeping all those extracurricular activities alongside your STEM interest really has helped, yeah. So I'm pretty invested in all of them.
So, I mean, there's this sort of misconception for some people that if you're aiming for a career in STEM, then you should have a very narrow field of view and have like a STEM only attitude. How important do you think versatility is for someone entering STEM? Like, if you had to live a life in which you spent most of your time on your biological sciences research and couldn't spend any time on your non-STEM interests or hobbies, would you prefer that? Would you be fine with that, or like would you prefer having a balance of both?
Definitely a balance of both, and I think it's necessary. It's not just a preference of mine, because when you get into STEM research, it's all about improving other people's lives, the world. And so you have to get that perspective and that understanding that you can only get if you know a wide range of things, and that includes extracurriculars. If I can take the example of like medicine, particularly that field, because you're the connection between the pure scientific research and the people and the public. So all those softer skills that you might not see primarily when you're working in a lab is extremely important to have, and that comes from sports and arts and music and everything like that.
So, I mean, like one thing I wanted to talk about specifically was, could you maybe like elaborate or shed a little bit more light on your experience working in a lab and how you approached, like how did you get in basically?
The good thing for me is that I started early, so I had enough time to convince the director of the lab that I was worth the time that they're going to spend on me. I approached the lab simply as a way to explore my subject of interest, especially since I was young. And so they were willing to teach or to expose me to a higher level of biology. And from that, I built my confidence with them. So I was able to tell them, like, yes, I understand this, even though I'm small. I can do this. I have the responsibility to take care of everything of this in the lab. You know, whether that's the sterility or keeping things in the right place or not contaminating things. So from very, very small steps, just as simply not moving anything, to showing that I can conduct complicated procedures, I managed to convince that director that, look, I am capable of such a project.
Yep.
Amazing. Lastly, do you have any advice for anyone getting started with research, usually like in the younger age?
I would definitely say explore all your options. Don't get fixated on one too early, because you never know what will surprise you in other fields. And I'd also say, I know for sure that they would be focusing on the science part. I would say focus on other things like the communication and your perseverance, and it really takes a lot of patience out of you, but you have to put that much in if you expect for your results to come out right.
Definitely. You should, like, you can't just focus on the science part if you can't tell anybody else about what you're doing. Because even in real life, I suppose you need grants and you need people to fund you. And you need, like, you just need to have to be able to converse with people from other fields as well.
Exactly.
Yep. So thank you, Mansi, for joining us today. And thanks, our audience. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you in our future episodes.
Thank you so much.